Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, former West Point psychology professor, professor of military science, and an Army Ranger infantry officer. Today, Colonel Grossman is the director of Grossman on Truth, grossmanontruth.com. Nobody respects your temper tantrums. Well, what can I say about the man, the legend himself, that hasn't been written or said already? The answer is, I cannot. So I will instead lead with a few quotes from the best-selling author of multiple books: On Killing, On Combat, On Spiritual Combat, Assassination Generation, and many others. Iron sharpens iron. What does healthy play for kids look like? Play stops when someone gets hurt. Use video games for good. True PTSD is, and of course, the title, Nobody Respects Your Temper Tantrums. This show is a must-watch for any emergency services, law enforcement, military member, or anyone that has been exposed to a traumatic event. Dave is truly a world leader in researching and deciphering the human response to stress, evolutionary biological responses to combat and confrontation, and an expert in actions on how to implement functional strategies for these into normal life. You can find out more about Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, his books, and how he's helping others at grossmanontruth.com. He's also on LinkedIn and on Insta, and check out the links below. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Damien Porter, former Special Forces operator, high performance living coach from eatwellmovewell.net, and you're listening to my Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast. Subscribe for more amazing tips, interviews, and wisdom from phenomenal guests, and get your free copy of my 5-day meal plan and exercise ebook at realketonesaustralia.com. This show is sponsored by realketonesaustralia.com, the best and most effective ketone supplement on the market to reduce anxiety, enhance brain performance, and supply twice as much energy as glucose. You can find all my former shows on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Google, Amazon, and Libsyn. Thanks for watching and listening. And we're live. Welcome to the Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast, and welcome to my guest, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Dave, it's great to see you. Thanks for chatting just now.
Hello, Damien. Proud to be on board. You've been doing some neat stuff with the podcast. I'm honored to be a part of it.
Look, it's an honor to have you on, and thank you so much for that. I'm just going to do a quick introduction of you and hopefully not mess it up too much, but just for the listeners, you know, Dave, you're an internationally recognized scholar, author, soldier, speaker, and one of the world's foremost experts in the field of human aggression and the roots of violence and violence crime. Really interesting and really well worded on your website there. You came to my knowledge, and I better just put on the glasses because it's 10 o'clock at night here. I know we're going to get into sleep. You came to my knowledge with your really famous book, On Killing. It was a game changer, and I'm sure it would have been a game changer for the military. And now you've gone on to write many other books on combat and your latest books as well. I'd like to just delve into how you got into that and what, just for the broad brushstrokes, what is On Killing about? Because it's quite an extreme sort of title.
Yeah, but there's kind of a triad of books that I've been wanting to do. The third one is on hunting, and you can pre-order on Amazon now. And when we think about who we are biologically, in On Hunting, we talk about if the existence of our species has been 24 hours, up until the last 6 minutes, all we did was hunt. We were hunter-gatherers, who we are and what we do. So you can't really understand killing and combat without understand hunting and how it weaves into who we are. So I guess the point is that I have always been intrigued by things that people aren't looking at, the things that nobody else is looking at. And what I found out was that killing was really a taboo topic. I had a guy from France send me an email about a decade back. He said, I was reading your book on killing, and if I'd been reading child porn, I probably wouldn't, on an airplane, people looking at the cover and judging me. It really is kind of a provocative subject.
It is.
I enlisted in the 82nd Airborne Division in 1974, a young paratrooper. We had Vietnam veterans all around us, and I was a real reader. Anytime I had anything of interest, I go to the library and check out all the books on the topic. And there were no books on combat. There were no books, not a homicide, but lawful killing of military and law enforcement.
Mm.
And so I ended up over a period of time. I went to grad school en route to being a West Point psych professor, and my graduate thesis, I turned in one chapter on killing because I didn't want the Army to claim that they
Oh,
owned it.
wow.
Just during that 2 years of graduate school, with all that energy and all that time, this thing took off, and it was another 4 years of hard work after grad school, refining and editing. Books for me tend to take a long time, usually years, and so it was great evolution. I thought what was at the heart of combat was killing. I thought that's the taboo heart of combat. And certainly for 18-year-old draftees, ambushing some guy ain't done them no harm, that lie at the core. But what I found out was, as I was teaching and the war began, I found out that really the heart of the matter was what's in on combat. And on combat's really the more important book,
Mm.
as far as somebody who's in the fight.
Absolutely.
Tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, slow motion time. When we talk about auditory exclusion, a lot of hunters know they don't hear the shot and your ears don't ring. But you are still getting hearing loss. We're hearing protection. The shutouts in the nerve, the ear's still being hammered. But hunting is the only area where you consistently tap into these realms of what we experience in combat, and the aftermath, how it becomes PTSD. So there's this evolution from killing to combat, and then kind of capstoning it with on hunting,
Yeah.
and a lot of other books in between to try to just answer the questions that nobody else is answering, to pull together the information that wouldn't otherwise be available. And here's three primal realms that nobody's ever written the definitive book on. I had to draw from every different direction.
And if I can just paint the picture for the listener and the audience, we've talked about some, as you said, taboo subjects already, and it may seem extreme, but what came to me, Dave, was I teach unarmed combat, and as I teach military unarmed combat for self-protection of civilians. I love having a female coming along that has never been in a fight that I can teach to protect herself. But reading your book well prior to that was, unless you're exposed to this, or stress inoculated, or whatever words you want to call it. And I know you've got scientific words and those things, but unless someone's been trained to do this, they can't perform on the day. And I actually proved
Yeah.
that. I proved it in the start of my course. I say to them, "Oh, what do you think you do? If some guy was on you on the ground, they'd say, oh, I'd bite his, if he's trying to get his mouth on you, whatever. I'd do this, I'd do that." They'd say horrible things. I go, "Would you now?" Well, let's just see. And we know that they won't. So what stood out in your book, was, the two deer, male deer fighting. They fight head to head. But that makes no sense if your job is to destroy the other person, other animal. And that showed through with the self-defense, self-protection courses. Unless they're trained in it, they won't do it. And your book was really interesting, showing the Civil War weapons, the Falklands War, and all these other examples of the trained soldiers that weren't trained correctly, couldn't even do it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been telling my audiences recently about on killing is, the hard thing to explain is not that 1 in a million terrible crime. The hard thing to explain is the 99.9% of our citizens go a lifetime never killed anybody or even seriously attempt to. I mean, you think about that: divorce, infidelity, layoff, traffic accidents.
Mm.
In a lifetime of provocation, less than 1 in 1,000 people will even seriously attempt to take a human life. Explain that. So there's this nexus of physical, sociological, psychological, biological dynamics that restrain violence. And looking at how we overcome that restraint in the military with realistic training, how video games can hypothetically be doing the same thing to kids, and this explosion of violence. When we talk about violence, one thing to float right up front for your listeners, people get it immediately. The best measure of the problem is the murder rate, the number of dead people. Ag assault and other things, we can manipulate the data. Where do we draw that magic
Yeah.
line between aggravated assault
What
and
does the
simple assault?
judge it as and so
Right.
on?
But the tricky thing is that medical technology is holding down the murder rate. Everybody has tourniquets. We slap on a tourniquet, we save a crime victim's life, we prevented a murder. So we've got one good data point. A UMass Harvard study came out in the year 2002. Between the 1960s and the 1990s, medical technology cut the murder rate to a third or a quarter would otherwise be. So
Oh,
to
wow.
compare the murders between the 90s and the 60s, take the murders in the 90s and multiply by a factor of 3 or 4. And the leaps and bounds of life-saving technology since the 90s is astounding. So we're being lied to every year. It's like putting out minimum wage and never once mentioning inflation. Your grandpa made 25 cents an hour. You make $25 an hour. Look how good you got it. Well, you immediately know the lie in that statement.
Yeah.
But when we say, well, the murder rate's up, but it's still not at the 1960s level, that's your BS meter going off. We immediately see the lie in that. And things are much, much worse than they look. The things that are peeling away these layers of protection, these physical, sociological, psychological dynamics that restrain killing are being unwound across our civilization, around the globe. We have children committing mass murders in the schools. We have terrible, terrible knife crimes. We just got around the globe. We're seeing horrible crimes that never really existed in human history. Children coming to school committing multiple homicides are unheard of. And you got to ask yourself, think like a scientist, think like a detective. What is a new factor worldwide? And that really homes into my book, Assassination Generation. And just this morning, it was Amazon. The Kindle was Amazon's #1 bestseller
Wow.
in adolescent psychology, which is pretty cool. Every morning I scan the news and I scan my books on Amazon and see if one of them's a bestseller. Boom, there it is.
What a feeling.
Amazon.
You're speaking about the murder rate going down because medical technology went up. That also happened in the military in armor protection. And so, of course, our death rate for the never-ending 19-year war went down a lot. But in fact, it was terrible for us because the guys are losing limbs, but they have body armor, so they're just a little torso hanging out. I can definitely see the correlation there, and it's crazy because some politician will just say, well, there's not many American deaths. There's not many, they don't see those little injuries. But I can definitely see where you're going with that. But let's just finish up on combat for the right reasons when we should be able to switch it off. What did you find from the horse's mouth for people who haven't read on combat? What did you find in soldiers that weren't highly trained that couldn't pull the trigger? What were those things that you found in your book that people would be interested in hearing, be surprised at?
As far as the factors that restrain killing, as you said, animals, when they go head to head, the most harmless fashion. Piranha sink their teeth, anything hits water except other piranha. They fight each other, flicks of the tail. Rattlesnakes sink their fangs, anything and everything except other rattlesnakes.
Wow.
And they wrestle one another. So the point becomes that when we become angry, when we become frightened, the forebrain shuts down and the midbrain takes over. And we slam head on into these biological resistances. Every one of your listeners out there has been red with rage at some point. You've just been overwhelmed with anger, but you didn't grab a steak knife and kill them. You didn't beat them to death. You didn't attack. You probably never even laid hands on them. So here you are, just red with rage, and yet you slammed into that resistance. And dropping bombs from 10,000 feet, no big deal. Firing artillery from from 2 miles away, no big deal. Even a sniper through a scope from 1,500 yards, no big deal. As we get closer and closer, the resistance becomes greater and greater. And there's dynamics that we used. We've got leadership dynamics, which is very powerful. The Milgram study of somebody with a lab coat and a clipboard, insisting that you inflict violence.
The electric shock, yes.
Yeah, well, a large portion will do that. We've got group dynamics. The firing squad really is a great dynamic. We've got the leader who gives the order but doesn't have to engage in the activity. We've got a group of individuals who are firing in the firing squad, and it's probably not your bullet that's going to kill them. And historically, supposedly one person had a blank round, so that there's this denial dynamic, and I'm not necessarily the one that killed him. This diffusion. We put a hood over the victim. And we don't do that for him. We do that so you don't have to look in the face of somebody when you kill them. Incidentally, wearing masks has great potential for increased violence in our society.
Absolutely.
So all of these dynamics play into the equation. And again, I thought that was what at the heart of combat. But then the second book on combat, the real things to be discovered were auditory exclusion, slow motion time, tunnel vision, and then aftermath dynamics.
That was phenomenal to hear about.
My son
Absolutely.
was Spec Ops, 9 combat tours, 3 Bronze Stars, but his first combat tour was the invasion of Afghanistan. And on combat was a book I literally wrote for my kid going to his first combat tour, pulling together all the nuts and bolts that needed to be done for that.
Thank you. I'm sure you've had to tell that story so many times, but I've got the chance to have you here. It's so good to get it from your perspective. How that relates to, I loved how you talked about from dropping bombs from an airplane compared to up close, because in what I work with is helping people save their own lives, or my background, a little bit of, I was a special forces operator and also a police officer for a couple of years. It's close. It's very close. In the civilian, it's going to be close because on a female, it's going to be an ambush. On a male amount, it's going to be aggression, but it's hand to hand. And they just, without being trained, you just won't react. You'll have that total fear response. And as our good friend Tony Blauer, who I know you wrote the forward for one of his books on, was amazing to read actually. He's got the spear system, the startle, the flinch response, because that high motor skill stuff just doesn't work. It's amazing to read your book on that. But when we pushed on to your next book, and I was hearing about all the law enforcement, again, close range, a lot of the time having to kill or defend themselves or others, the things that you're talking about, auditory exclusion, the whole body going on hyper alert was amazing. Can we talk about the auditory exclusion? Because that alone tells me how you started, how we're wired. You talked about 24 hours and 6 minutes.
Yeah.
We are wired. If you're saying our ears actually have a response faster than a gunshot.
Well, part of what's happening, there are times when we have auditory exclusion, muted sound and overwhelming sound. And almost every time I've ever run into it, you're caught by surprise in an ambush. Boom, 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 shots overwhelming. You start shooting back, and the shots get muted. So the point becomes that the body focuses intensely on the sense it needs most for survival. If you're caught by surprise by a gunshot, the gunshot's overwhelming. But if you're shooting back, the eyes dial in, the ears dial out. So it's not a factor of being faster than the bullet. It's actually a neural dynamic. The ear is still being hammered. We know that now. It's a matter of the body focuses intensely on the sense it needs most for survival. I've interviewed thousands of people about their experiences in combat across all these years. But one time it was the other way around. Usually ambush, it's overwhelming, start shooting back, the shots get muted. Then one time it was the other way around. A cop was in the dark at night on a porch and was literally shot off a porch. So shots were muted. He was in a blazing gunfight. He's hit. He falls to the side off of a porch behind a hedge. It's pitch black. He's wounded. He's trapped.
Mm.
And what do you suppose happened? The ears dial in, the eyes dial out. There's nothing for the eyes to capture.
Right.
So sounds became overwhelming as he's there in this darkness, in helpless, really hurt in this gunfight, and the ears dial in, and the shots are overwhelming, and there's nothing for the eyes to see. So it's a dynamic of the body focuses intensely on the sense it needs most for survival, and it doesn't happen in in your average street fight. It
No.
doesn't happen in any other circumstance, only in life and death combat and hunting.
Yeah.
Those are the two times when we see this biological dynamic come into play. The other one that is tunnel vision, and bad guys have tunnel vision too. And a lateral movement can take you right off their radar screen. I'm teaching a lot more about getting explosively off the X.
Yeah.
Just an explosive sidestep. At least you're a moving target. At best, you literally come right off the radar screen, because bad guys have tunnel vision too. Of all the kind of auditory perceptual distortions, the one that's probably most common and people are least aware of is tunnel vision. We know that because we'll look at videos, of a force-on-force engagement. It's not kill or be killed, but it's hurt or be hurt. Airsoft, paintballs, ammunition, UTM. And they'll see the video, and there's something right in front of them that they weren't aware of. So they weren't conscious of tunnel vision until you go back and look at the video, and you look at the things that were right in front of them that they didn't see. Which brings us to the whole subject of Monday Morning Quarterback, looking at the video and saying, well, why didn't he see that? And a reasonable person would have seen that, and holding somebody accountable for a standard of performance that is completely flawed if you don't understand what's happening to somebody in that life and death incident.
Absolutely. That's phenomenal that you say that. I interviewed John McPhee, a Delta Force operator. Shrek is his nickname, but he's the same. He was in the kill house, whatever the unit calls theirs, and he's literally watching the video afterwards. He's like, I did not do that, and he's watching himself do it. The video doesn't lie. I'm just going to wind back a bit. It's interesting. We're talking about auditory exclusion and tunnel vision. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a SWAT operator over here, Tactical Response Group, and he was telling me about the first time he shot a guy. They're in a jewelry store, if I can tell a story. Jewelry store, waiting for the bad guy to come in. They're behind the counter, which is behind a wall, and he's closest to the door. Bad guy comes running through the door of the front door of the jewelry store, comes charging through the actual store, and then breaches the door that they're hiding behind. And he just leans over, and all he sees is the muzzle. He sees that 9mm or whatever caliber it was, because that's all that matters, as we know when we're disarming. And he sees that. He tunneled on that, and then he's just gone boom, boom. No Peltors back in those days, no hearing protection. He didn't hear a thing. I was talking to him last week. Didn't hear a thing, but all he saw was that. And then when he pulled the trigger, didn't hear anything. Then he was watching where his rounds were going, and he saw exactly that. And it was amazing to hear him say exactly what every study and you said in your book on combat.
And one of the most fascinating things is where you hear the brass hit the ground behind you, but you don't hear the shots. Wow. I've heard that over and over again. They'll hear the brass hit the ground. They even when they're working, with a semi-auto or full auto weapon, they'll hear the cycling of the weapon, but they don't hear the shot. And that's all. It's all in the neurons. The actual ear is still being hammered. It's this very selective filtering that happens within the brain. And I think biologically speaking, it's about tuning out the lion's roar. It's about tuning out the fellow predator, and all of the posturing that happens as a part of combat. Being able to tune that out. Most specifically, the lion's roar is a multi-harmonic, powerful dynamic that can literally freeze somebody in their tracks. and we've got biological dynamics in place to tune it out. And
Wow.
I think that is a biological foundation for, why would we have this? The gunpowder weapons didn't exist, throughout this formative part of who we were. Why do we have this auditory exclusion?
Yeah,
And I think its value in nature lies in tuning out the lion's roar, tuning out the predator's roar, and being able to focus intensely on the sounds that you need.
that's very
I was on an airplane one time, little prop job going from Casper, Wyoming to Salt Lake City, and there's two seats down one side, one seat down the other side. I'm a little extra row window seat, and one of the biggest guys I've ever seen comes down the aisle. I said, "Dear Lord, don't let him sit with me," and he did. Right, so I'm over here hunched over against the window, and I said, "Oh, you're a pretty healthy guy." I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm on the national sports team." I said, "What's your sport?" He said, "I wrestle." I said, "You been to the Olympics?" He said, "I won the gold." It was Rulon Gardner, Rulon Gardner, the guy that beat the Russian that's ever been beat, and great guy, wonderful discussion. What do you do? I told him about, and we got into this great discussion about sensory focusing and auditory exclusion. I've always thought that world champion athletes are tapping into this. Baseball players who see 100-mile-an-hour pitch coming at them and can see the stitching on the ball.
wow.
That's slow motion time. He talked about how he doesn't hear the crowd, but he hears his coach. About sensory focusing, he talks about an underhook, how total sensory focusing, all there is on the planet is his hand coming down for an underhook, sensory focusing, auditory exclusion. Here's this world-class athlete who's tapping into some of those things, and it made for one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had. Hunched over against the window here, but yeah, I think that world-class athletes are tapping into these things, and it's fascinating how they can
Maybe that's
become
the maybe
available.
that's the flow state that you know doing dangerous things, and there's the other six triggers, but that's the only one that relates here. Maybe that's again that chemical cocktail in our brain that a flow state will bring about causes them to do superhuman things. These athletes, maybe that's what we're producing there in during combat.
Yes, and that's the hypothesis,
Mm,
and I think the data supports it. All these things that have been developed across years, which brings us back to hunting. We can't understand who we are and what we do without really homing in on the act of hunting. And I'm increasingly convinced of all the activities you could engage in to prepare for combat, hunting is by far the best. Not only is there this pool of things that you tap into, but my little 7-year-old grandson came to deer camp with us. He got away from school for a week in the fall, came home grubby and dirty, and his mom said, "What'd you like the best?" He said, "Gutting the deer." For a 7-year-old boy,
yeah,
process of gutting the deer, and this is the liver and this is the heart, and what's that? Oh, that's the large intestines. You cut it open. What's in it? Oh, crap. And so to experience that stuff at a young age, if the first time you ever run into what's inside a living creature is some terrible crime scene, some horrible accident scene, then we've set you up for failure. You
mm,
should have encountered those things at a very young age in some kind of a positive manifestation. And there's so many things that hunting do for us biologically. We also talk about hunting as being the salvation of the ecology. In America, the millions of hunting licenses are the primary means. We have Ducks Unlimited. We have pooled resources to save wetlands for ducks and upland hunting preserves. There's this model that we pull out in the book about Kenya versus Botswana. And Kenya
oh
has
wow,
banned all trophy hunting, but the game in Kenya is being slaughtered. Whereas in, say, Botswana, they make a circle around the village and say everything in this circle belongs to you. So that crazy American or that crazy Australian who will pay $100,000 to come and kill that lion, who's at the end of the life cycle anyway. And oh, by the way, death by old age and nature is a slow, hideous, horrible death.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, in which you were literally eaten alive by insects and rodents. You know, and here he is at the end of the life cycle, worth $100,000. So this village is deeply invested in protecting their game and nurturing the ecosystem around them. And that's got to be the future, is tapping into that resource to fund the protection that these ecosystems need. All of that kind of ties into that dynamic of where hunting fits into the modern world to preserve our nature and to provide the money that is necessary to preserve the habitat and the wildlife.
Ecology, and it's amazing. In 2022, we've sort of lost our way somewhat. I interviewed Mark Matheson. He calls himself an eco psychologist, but he was the psychologist for Australian SAS and Commandos here, and is a great show and a great listen. But yeah, his version of psychology is that ecocide. It's got to be. It can't just be. Let's say, what is that one where they're doing the EMDR or different eye movement
Yeah,
to
yeah,
disassociate. He's
yeah.
looking at
EMDR.
yeah, he's looking at social, he's looking at get in nature, all these things, which is just what we've sort of lost our way in, Dave. So it's amazing that you've written a book on that. I'm just going to run back to on combat and tie that in a bow, because we spoke about policing a fair bit, and it does, listening to the book, it did seem like it had a large focus on policing, which was great because on killing, hey, not everybody's in the army. Very hard to relate to that. And back in those days, you knew even less people in the military. And then the people that did have to do the job, like us, we're secluded from the public. But police officers, they've got to come home to their wife. They've got to come home to their kids every night. You know, it's not like going away on a 6 month
Yeah.
mission with the military. Now, my question here was, after they've gone through, they go to work, they kiss goodbye to their wife, they strap on the gun belt, or in my country, in New Zealand, there's no gun, and here in Australia, I had a gun. They strap in the gun belt and they expect to come home, and they don't expect to shoot anybody. Their job is to prevent damage to life and property. So, what? How do you get a law enforcement officer to switch off a life-changing event during their shift of work and not just explode? Can we have a look into that a little bit, please?
Well, overcoming the resistance has turned out to be not very hard. In World War II, about 15 to 20% of the individual riflemen would pull the trigger. Our key weapons and crew-served weapons usually fired.
Mm,
Left to their own devices, the individual rifleman wouldn't pull the trigger. And it was a training flaw. We taught them to shoot bullseyes. We have no known case any bullseyes ever attacking our troops. You've been in the armed forces since the Korean War. You probably never once shot a bullseye. A man-shaped silhouette, pop-shaped field of view, hit the target drop, stimulus response. So by the Korean War, the firing rate's up around 50%. By Vietnam, 95%. Was still a lot of spraying and praying. We've taken that step further with simulators, and we've not just increased the firing rate, but the hit rate exponentially.
mm.
The leap between Vietnam and the current war was not increasing the firing, it was increasing the hit rate through simulators. But the point is, with realistic simulators, we overcome that resistance. And oh, by the way, the video games are doing the same thing to kids.
Yeah.
With children without the safeguard of safety, of discipline, to children without discipline. And the result is an explosion of violence around the globe, children committing crimes that children like nothing in human history. Ask yourself, what's the new factor? Mexico's had half a dozen juvenile mass murders in the school. Brazil's had almost half a dozen. Canada's had over a dozen multiple homicides by juvenile in the school. Finland's had 3 multiple homicide by a juvenile in the school. One of the worst in history was in Germany,
Mm,
a juvenile committing a mass murder in the school. So worldwide, children are committing crimes that we've never seen before.
mm.
Repeating firearms have always been there. Access to weapons have always been there. Canada kind of brought it to, or Australia and New Zealand kind of brought it by, island nation, complete control of the borders, confiscate all weapons. But it's not a viable tactic for most other people in so many ways. But we've taken off the safety catch. Confiscating the guns was really kind of dodging the main issue of what we've done to our children, how we're empowering violence. England is seeing knife violence. One month last year, England had more murders than New York City had, and London had more murders than New York City, and they were all knife murders. So what do we confiscate next? When do we stop looking at the object and start looking at the person and what we're feeding to them? And of course, the wild card in that whole equation becomes this global epidemic of sleep deprivation. The video games, the movies on demand, the sleep deprivation is a complete wild card in the whole equation. It's a key factor in suicide, which has exploded worldwide at all ages and all nations. Sleep deprivation is a key factor in traffic deaths. Sleep deprivation is a key factor in opiate overdoses because sleep deprivation creates chronic pain. You don't sleep, the tendons and muscles never chest fully relaxed. Doctor heard all the time, give me a pill to fix, you don't need a pill, you need more sleep.
Yeah.
So we know without a doubt that sleep deprivation is a factor in suicide. And I would tell you that the same dynamics that restrain and empower suicide are restraining and empowering murder. And I would tell you, I believe without a doubt that sleep deprivation is a contributing factor to violence. One of the ways to overcome this resistance is to hit this irrational state of sleep deprivation. And it's a key factor in suicide and traffic deaths and opiate overdoses. And of course, it's a factor in homicides.
It's interesting you speak about sleep deprivation, and I'll come back to the police one for on combat after that, because we've done a little tangent. We got a bit to unpack.
Yeah.
Sleep deprivation, of interest was us. Our squadron, they kept us awake for a week. Scientists from United States, Canada, Australia, Oskanzukis, UK all came, and they kept us awake for a week and sleep deprived us. But I won't go into that. I've told that story in another show. What they did tell us was that after 18 hours, you're legally drunk. And this is not disputed. As a police officer, during my shift, if I'd hit the 18-hour mark, and I had to finish work, I wouldn't drive home. I'd go and sleep on the sergeant's couch for an hour. Had to do it because I don't want to drive underneath a bus or kill someone else. But I'm just trying to explain for the listeners the big picture of how sleep deprivation, if you're legally drunk, you're unable to drive a vehicle safely, you're more likely to do online purchases at night, because what's the first thing when we're drunk? We lose some inhibition. Well, you lose an inhibition to not pull the trigger. We know men are more violent. Less men commit suicide, but when they do it because we're more aggressive. More women want to commit suicide, but they can't pull it. So that drunkenness state of sleep deprivation, I've never thought about it until you brought it up in a child. Their sleep patterns are off and they've got less inhibitions.
Yeah. Oh, and it kind of comes back to new technology. The video game industry will never say, you've been playing this game for 36 hours straight, you need to get some sleep.
Wow.
Facebook will never say, you've been online for 48 hours, you got to get some sleep now. They'll never say that. The head of Netflix said their number one competitor is not other online providers. Their number one competitor is sleep. The corporate policy of Netflix is to steal your sleep.
Wow.
So, my dad started smoking in 1940 when he was 5 years old. He plunked a nickel on the counter, bought a pack of Bull Durham tobacco and rolling papers, and at 5 started, and candy rots your teeth, cigarettes are good for you. My audience is, I hold up ads where they say, as your dentist, I recommend Viceroys. More doctors smoke Camels. Well,
yeah.
Doctors smoke Camels, dentists say Viceroys. Which one should, they're poison, don't do it. But here's this industry joyfully selling tobacco to a 5-year-old. Well, the whole battle against tobacco, we didn't ban tobacco. We said, don't sell this stuff to children.
The American Council for Clean Air, I remember the American Council for Clean Air, which started by the nephew of Sigmund Freud, was actually paid for by the tobacco companies. And of course, they said for many, many years it was safe.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And you know, and we're dealing with the same thing with the video game industry, incredibly wealthy industry. One video game, Grand Theft Auto 5, the year it came out, made more money than the entire global music industry. And again, we go into that in my book, Assassination Generation.
Wow.
One video game made more money than every rock concert on the planet, every musician, every CD, every download on the planet. So
Wow.
this is an incredibly wealthy industry. They're not spending their money on commercials. They're spending all their money on research on how to make the games more addictive and bogus research to try, like the tobacco industry. There's stooge scientists on a leash to try to say that video games aren't doing any harm. So here's an industry fighting tooth and nail all the way to our Supreme Court. It's in the book to sell any game. Your listeners may find it of value. In 2005, the state of California overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access to violent video games. Home of Silicon Valley, home of Hollywood, the data was that powerful. Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. He signed the bill. He said, I make violent movies. I protect my kids from violent movies. I particularly want to protect them from these violent video games. And the video game industry fought all the way to the Supreme Court to sell any game to any kid at any age. So the point is that we're dealing with the same predatory industry, which a side effect becomes sleep deprivation, violence enabling, killing simulators being fed to children, and we wonder what's wrong. And this incredibly wealthy industry is pumping all their money back into research on how to make the games more addictive and more powerful, and to thwart anybody who would try to claim the harm that's being done by these video games. So it's a toxic dynamic right now, and that parallel to tobacco in 1940 and these industries that are stealing our sleep. Again, Facebook, the video game industry, they don't care. Netflix, they don't care. Play the game until you die. They just want to sell their product.
But it's not their responsibility, Dave. I'm very agnostic on many things. Fair enough to them to make the money. But the telling point in what you said about 7 minutes ago was the kids without discipline that are doing this.
Yeah.
Now, that said, the fact that they're being exposed to a killing simulator, you can't undo that. I'm listening to Atomic Habits at the moment, and it's talking about how your habits form your personality, because it's what you're doing repeatedly every day that form your personality. I can only think that if you're repeatedly playing, back in the day, Grand Theft Auto, but now look at what degree they're going to, that's going to form your personality and your habits of, well, that person said something to me, so I'll stab them.
There's an angle on that, though. And you're right. We've got the virtual reality now, and you're going to see a lot more stabbing and sword attacks. The virtual reality makes the physical process of stabbing and slashing. You're going to see a tremendous increase in knife murders. But one of the things to understand is what's happening is B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning, creating this motor memory and having it available. But operant conditioning has a half-life of about 6 months.
Right.
That's why in the military, we have to requalify every 6 months or a year, depending on what, and pilots have to be in the simulator at least every 6 months. So yes, there are habits that become ingrained, and there's things that are never undone. Social, learning models roll over fairly quickly. Classical conditioning, associating pleasure with human death and suffering. That's classical conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning, can last for decades. But the actual operant conditioning has about a half-life of about 6 months. So there's hope that if we could cut it off, it would begin to taper off. It's not that you're poisoned for a lifetime. It's that condition response does decay. And in a couple of years, it's got a half-life of about 6 months. So you get an idea of half-life over time.
Yep.
It really is an accurate reflection of how the skill decays.
Now, we're not talking hypothetically, I'm saying this for the listener, not for yourself, obviously, we're talking real. And you spoke about in On Combat about a child. I call him child. I don't know what age he would have been, but it was a school killer who'd never fired a gun in his life, and he had, however, played. I think it was Time Crisis, which we used to play in the video game arcades every now and then. And I say every now and then because that probably correlates to the Half Life. But you talked about this kid who got a gun, who never shot it, and he achieved 5 headshots out of 6 or something. Does that sound familiar?
It was Paducah, Kentucky. I never say the name of any of the killers. By the way, one of the ingredients in this whole equation is the fame that the media gives them. You know, what's coming next is daycare massacres and school bus massacres, because what's left to shock us, what's left to stun us, and the media will turn these killers into celebrities. And I tell everybody that the New Zealand mosque massacres, and the Prime Minister of New Zealand said, we'll never say this man's name, we'll never show this man's picture.
I remember.
I've got a book coming out on spiritual combat, is done well, on spiritual warfare. And on spiritual warfare, we quote the Prime Minister of New Zealand as this positive example. Never say their names, never show the picture. Say, you know, he was a 20-year-old Caucasian male. That's all we need to know. Don't make them famous. And here's New Zealand establishing kind of this world standard. Said New Zealand will not even give this man his name. Finally, somebody gets it. But the fame dynamic in the whole equation with the media turning these killers into celebrities is another whole piece of the equation. And now, you know, one of the driving forces is to get a bigger body count. You know, almost all of these killers are studying. So I never say the name of the killer, but the case you're talking about, Paducah, Kentucky, we got a high school freshman. He'd fired a .22 caliber rifle at camp one time. Other than that, he's never fired a real weapon, but he stole a .22 caliber pistol from a neighbor's house. He fired one magazine of ammo on a previous night. That was his transition fire.
Right.
He fired a magazine of ammo at a rubber ball. He made the transition from the simulator to reality. And then he opened fire on a prayer group in the foyer of his school. He fired 8 shots, got 8 hits on 8 different kids, 5 of them headshots, the other 3 upper torso. You know, we talk about caliber of weapon, it's all about shot placement. This guy put one .22 caliber bullet in 8 kids, 5 of them headshots, 3 of them were KIA with medical support there immediately. 3 of them were dead, and 1 of them paralyzed for life. For all practical purposes, one .22 caliber bullet in 8 different kids, 50% kill rate with the .22. You know, it's all about shot placement.
Absolutely.
But this kid's supernatural marksmanship skills were all from arcade level point and shoot video games.
Yep.
And as you said, one of the classic ones is Time Crisis. We didn't mention that one in the book, but your mind filled in that gap. These point and shoot arcade games that he had literally hundreds of thousands of shots on the simulator. He has 1 magazine of ammo, you know, a transition fire, and then the reality, 8 shots, 8 hits on 8 different kids, 5 of them headshots. So, you know, one of the things these things are providing is the skill. And again, there is a half-life to that. It does decay over time.
It is a simulator. You're absolutely right using those words, or I concur. And I can only imagine, you know, I'm 49 years old now. I can only imagine what it'll be like with these more violent games that I have not seen. But what I loved in your book On Combat was you talked about healthy play for kids. And as a dad, I absolutely think that being a good parent makes you a better human. And there's a key word there, that's a good parent.
Yes.
I love that you talked about what healthy play looks like for kids. And you reminded me what it was like when I was a little kid. Can you outline how you spoke about that and what healthy play looks like when we're having a bit of rough and tumble?
It's something I try to mention to every audience. It's how we're empowering bullying. We're teaching kids to take pleasure from inflicting death and suffering. So in healthy play, everybody out there, I see even you ladies, you know, One time another, we all played toy guns. Said, bang, bang, I got you. Said, no, you didn't. So you smack him with your toy gun. It leaves a mark and he cries. Everybody gather around the hurt kid. Try to convince him not to tell mom. Somebody gets hurt and the play stops. In a football game, in a basketball game, one of the players gets hurt. The fans go silent. The play stops. Kittens and puppies wrestle with each other, but when one of them gets hurt, mom comes and checks it out. So, and healthy play is about not hurting, about not inflicting pain and suffering. I like paintball. None of these killers are paintballers. Paintball is a very restrained environment. You take your mask off, you shoot at the wrong time at the wrong place, you're banned from the field, and nobody's hurt. The goal is not to hurt. When somebody gets hurt, the play stops. Well, in the video game, you blow your playmates' heads off and explosions of blood. They beg for mercy. They writhe in pain. They bleed. Realistic depictions of human suffering. Does the play stop? No, you get points. This is pathological play. This is dysfunctional play. Can you not tell the difference between healthy play? Somebody gets hurt, the play stops. And a video game where you're conditioned, rewarded for inflicting pain and suffering on others, realistic depictions of pain and suffering. And the primary thing we're doing here is creating a generation of bullies. And the bullying worldwide is almost impossible to comprehend. We say, I was bullied when I was a kid. It can't be worse than that. Well, the violence in our schools are worse than that, in spite of everything we're doing. I said, do you remember when you were a kid? Do you remember that bully who sincerely took pleasure in making you suffer? There's many, many more of those kids out there today. This is dysfunctional play. It's pathological play. Anytime children are being rewarded and taking pleasure from inflicting suffering on then it's time out. This is not something that children should be doing.
You painted in such a great way with, don't tell mum, please don't tell it so we don't get into trouble. Those habits those habits that give you reward, they become ingrained, and the habits that cause you pain get discarded. And that is just absolutely messed up with the simulation that kids are watching in the video games. I love that you painted that picture of what healthy play looks like for kids. Just to tie a bow in the police side of things, I didn't quite get the answer to my question. So I'll ask it a better way. The soldier trains for years to go and do the job of a soldier, an infantry soldier is to kill or capture the enemy, and then goes away on a tour for 6 months, maybe 1 or 2, and then comes back and reintegrates in society slowly and hopefully switches that off. The policeman, though, on that night has to take a life or had a close call on his own. How does he reintegrate to the family straight away that night? How does he become a job? What is the best practice for that person to survive the job, I guess, and integrate?
Yeah. I've got a book, I about 10% ownership, called On Killing Remotely. And the guy was a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who had commanded a predator battalion. And his unit killed more bad guys than any other Marine Corps unit and it was all whacking them with Hellfire missiles from but that predator operator, and I trained predator and reaper organizations across America, that predator operator has been ordered to kill that terrorist. If they do not kill that terrorist, they failed in their mission. In law enforcement, the mission is never to kill.
No.
You're always trying to save lives. You're using deadly force because you sincerely believe there is no other option in the face of immediate threat of life, limb, or grievous bodily harm or self-defense. The moment that person drops the gun, the moment that person is no longer a deadly force threat, we slap on a tourniquet, we apply CPR, and that life is precious as any other life on the planet. So there's this fundamental difference between military and law enforcement. And the military, our mission is to kill and harm the enemy. In law enforcement, our mission is to save lives. And we use deadly force because it's the only option left. Incidentally, we're seeing a lot more work with tasers. New Zealand has kind of pioneered some of the state-of-the-art tasers. tasers on drones now. We'll put
Yeah.
a taser on a drone, a multi-shot taser on a drone
Wow.
is going to revolutionize law enforcement.
Wow.
So there's two different causal dynamics going on with the very motivation of law enforcement. But you're right. We talked about predator operators who are whacking bad guys and then go home to their kids, to their kids' t-ball game.
Yeah.
And how do they deal with that? Well, the point is they're dealing with it just fine. They're doing fine. Law enforcement is generally doing fine. The military has a 1 year deployment, 6 month deployment. They come home and they get to leave it behind them. The police never get to do that. But so not to cop a pity party. Our police officers across the board are doing pretty well. What's happened recently is nationwide recruiting is down, retention is down. We're being hammered. Law enforcement is just on such a tragic downtrend. The attacks on law enforcement in the media, the negative dynamics of what's been going on, another whole story. But in general, law enforcement is a great example to say these guys deal with it year after year. And the truth is that in most cases, they're just fine. And how do they depressurize? Well, they come home and they're able to, one of the most important things of all is getting a good, safe night's sleep. In the military, in the field, in combat is not always an option. They've got a good nutritious meal, a good safe night's sleep. They can depressurize when they get home every night. They got to be careful. A guy named Kevin Gilmartin wrote a great book about life stress in law enforcement. How you come home and you unglue. I don't want to talk about nothing. I don't want to do nothing. I don't want to talk about the job. And then what a negative cycle they're on. They're up on the job and they come home and they crash. They're up on the job, they come home and they crash. And how we've got to avoid that and how that can become pretty pathological. You've got to have a life outside the job. That's law enforcement. You got to have a hobby. You got to have something that you do, even if Boy Scout leader or assistant coach for your kid's t-ball team. It's about having a life outside the job is essential for the wellness of law enforcement.
Purpose. I speak about purpose with a lot of the veterans. That's so important because they lose that identity when they're transitioning out of the military. But telling there when you said about sleep, and I literally before our show I posted today. I normally post a provocative question on the socials each day, and this one was how do you separate emotion from a traumatic event memory? And the first answer is sleep. So
Yeah, and really what you just asked is the core of PTSD. You're in a life and death event. A week later, something triggers the memory, and your sympathetic nervous system arousal you're on that roller coaster ride, your heart's pounding, adrenaline's pumping through your body. That is not PTSD.
no.
It's normal. It becomes PTSD when you re-experience the event and you try to not think about it. You will literally drive yourself crazy trying to not think about it. What you got to do is separate the memory from the emotions. And how do you do that? Well, one of the most important tools that we found, the breathing, starting in the 1980s, I was interviewing World War II vets and Vietnam vets by the hundreds for my book on killing. And I knew if they discuss their combat experience and they become emotional, then they're re-experiencing the event, and that's not good. I'd make them stop and breathe. Today, we put a bottle of water in front of them. And every time they start to become emotional, we make them stop and take a big swig of water. A friend of mine is one of our nation's leading therapists for federal agents. And she debriefs them after a deadly force incident, puts a bottle of water in front of them.
Yeah.
And every time they start to become emotional, they stop and take that swig of water. And she told me, she said, 6 years of college, 14 years of practice, and that stupid bottle of water is doing more good than anything I've ever done. But that drink of water pulls us from fight or flight to rest and digest. The sympathetic, parasympathetic processes. I tell people,
I listened to Andy Stumpf and you as some of my research for this show, and my first research was literally 20 years ago. So thank you. And
Yeah.
I heard that, but there's a big difference in hearing and understanding. I just realized because it is the rest and digest system, and you have to digest the water. So you have
Yep.
cheated it perfectly by
Yes.
doing that.
Yes. And a lot of people heard of CISM, critical incident stress management debriefings. I teach at their international conference in Baltimore almost every year. Everybody understands a debriefing. We all sit around the table. We talk about what happened, fill in the memory gaps, sort out the memory distortions. But when we do it now, everybody's got a bottle of water in front of them. And as we discuss what happened, if anybody becomes emotional, they take that swig of water, regain control.
Mm,
I tell people you're a police officer getting a witness statement from a victim of a crime. If that person becomes emotional while they talk about what happened, A, you don't need all that drama. B, they're moving down the path of mental illness. They're starting to associate the memory with the emotions.
mm,
But put a bottle of water in front of that person. Just the power of a gift. Put a bottle of water in front of them, crack the seal in front of them.
yeah.
And as this witness statement, as you collect this witness statement, every time they start to become emotional, make them stop and take that swig of water. A, you're getting that calm, rational statement you need, but B, you're sending them down the path of mental wellness from the very beginning. There was a pretty tragic incident in Thousand Oaks, California, a bit of blue on blue dynamics in play, and horrific multiple homicide.
Oh no.
And a fellow, a mental health provider, was working with one of the police officers who had been there. He said the individual wants to go and walk through the scene. And is there any advice I would give him on help with the process? I said, well, have him do it with a bottle of water in his hand. And as he walks through the scene, anytime he begins to re-experience the event, that swig of water pull you from fight or flight to rest and digest.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's the process of swallowing and breathing. It hits the stomach. I say, a deer's being chased by a wolf. You stop and get a drink, he's really thirsty. I can't get a drink, I'm being chased by a wolf.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
fact that you stop and take a drink really is powerful. It was a New Zealand, just a little podcast with a New Zealand Australian paramedic
Yep.
and EMS, and he talked about how this guy was becoming emotional. He said, "Drink that bottle of water, drink it all," and he drank the bottle of water, completely regained control. This is such a powerful tool that we can apply in the emergency room, in the ER around the planet. If you've got some crackhead or meth head tearing up your ER, they grab a bag of M&Ms, they rip it open, they shove it to his face, which like some M&Ms, and the large majority of the time completely diffuse the situation. Just that seeing that chocolate, the candy, seeing that, smelling that, thinking about it, can pull them from fight or flight to rest and digest, and there's great power in that. I tell my police officers, I am by just because they've done it so long, 25 years. I've trained cops in all 50 states, and probably America's #1 law enforcement trainer. I've been the #1 target for Antifa and defund the police, and we get emails that are nasty grams from these guys that are, what they're going to do to my family and what they're going to do to me, and I can't control what these idiots do. I can only control how I choose to respond.
Yeah, of course.
So I've got some candy that I let myself have about once a week or so. I get one of these nasty grams. I get a piece of candy. I almost look forward to it now, and and now I talk about that, and they say, "You evil bastard! We tell you how evil you are, and you get a chocolate covered cherry." That's right. So who wins now? So I tell my cops, I like Tootsie Rolls. They're individually wrapped. They stay clean. They're good in the cold. They're good in the heat. Have a little baggie of Tootsie Rolls in your car. And when somebody gets in your face, we talk about losing your temper. You don't lose your temper, you give it away. It's the one thing you can control. The only thing the universe you can control is yourself. And you don't lose your temper, you give it away. That's easy to say, it's not so easy to do.
Yeah.
So when somebody's in your face, the only time you get one of those Tootsie Rolls is when somebody's ugly to you. And when somebody gets your face, you say, you know what? I could have a Tootsie Roll. And again, you can't control what these idiots do. You can only control how you choose to respond.
Mm.
and you go back to that car, and you're bubbling with rage, you're bubbling with anger. You
Mm,
put that Tootsie Roll in your mouth, it pulls you from fight or flight to rest and digest. And very commonly, it's called fight or flight or feed and breed, which gives a more holistic, instead of in the rest and digest. Now there's a
mm.
real common term calling it feed and breed, but you're back to food and that parasympathetic dynamic that calms people down, that Tootsie Roll, that chocolate covered cherry, the M&Ms and the ER.
And you're doing
These are
that,
these
you're doing the reward for the habit, the positive reward, and therefore that police officer is going to not be as scared each time, so he's less scared each time going to that confrontation. It's phenomenal. You've got some very clever hacks there.
they're life hacks. They really are.
It
And
is.
it's all about us regaining control of our lives and our physiology. We all understand fight or flight. The
Mm,
one that blindsides people is feed and breed, because there is this biological backlash. Victims of violent crime will have very intense sex. It's an affirmational life in the face of death. Frank Herbert called it the universal drive for immortality through progeny in the face of death. Emergency responders, EMS, fire, cops will come home and have very intense sex, and it scares them. And I tell them that not a lot of perks that come with this job, just if you find one, relax and enjoy it, but off duty, wait till you're off duty. It'll still be there, I promise. And
I think there's a book about that. Is it a Battlefield? I don't know if it's Battlefield 6 or something, but it was
yes,
a female photojournalist, war journalist, speaking about that exact thing because of the heightened state of fight and flight.
and what we saw, when they besiege a city, and if there was a gap of a certain distance that you could ride over with a horse, then the city would surrender. If
Right.
there's a gap in the wall, if they didn't, we see this famously in Henry V, that about what we're going to do to the city of Harfleur, if you don't surrender. Well, when they had to fight their way into the city, there was terrible rampage of what, looting and raping,
Mm.
and there's feed and breed, this feed and breed dynamic. So I recently did a presentation of all of the U.S. Army's sexual harassment and assault investigators and counselors,
Mm.
and I said, everybody understands fight or flight, and it's not an excuse. Fight or flight hormones kicked in, and I choked him out, and I couldn't control myself. Nobody's buying that. Well, as we understand feed and breed, it's not ever an excuse. But when we roll it out like fight or flight, when we realize it's a normal biological response, then we can deal with it just like fight or flight. We understand we have to control our fight or flight responses, and
Mm.
we understand we have to control our feed or breed responses. And so much of this stuff, the breathing, the swig of water, understanding feed and breed backlash, these are major steps forward as a species of bringing things under conscious control. And in so many ways, what we're living in is the worst of times, it's the best of times. A
Yeah.
terrible, terrible violence at domestic levels, and yet learning things and applying things and getting a degree of self-control. The breathing exercise I'm doing with very small children now, and it's very powerful. I did it with my grandkids. With the way the doc does it, the doc's got a scented plastic flower and a candle, and I'm talking 3 years old. And the doc models the behavior: smell in the flower, enjoy it, blow out the candle, watch the smoke. Now you do it. And that fast, you got a 3-year-old breathing on command.
That's
And
beautiful.
there you are at your very youngest ages, learning how to reach out and grab conscious control of this unconscious part of your body. What a huge developmental leap forward as a species to teach this to our children. So
Absolutely.
these are the worst of times and the best of times.
Control the controllables. Another guest of mine, Ollie Ollerton, spoke about that. Um, and we do have control over how we breathe. We have control over how we eat. We control what we put in our mouth. But you've absolutely nailed. Hang on a sec. You have to have control over your feed and breed, as you call it. that probably brings us to the last point of the quiet professional, because we talked about the soldier, we talked a little about special forces operators, talked about the law enforcement guys. There's a lot of them out there that are under the radar, that have got all that stuff under excellent conscious control, and they are the quiet professionals. So many more special forces operators through what happened with Afghanistan. I mean, it's phenomenal. That's years of battle training. You got generations. I interviewed a guy that was the next generation in my unit. He came in after I left, and I was hearing about his story. He'd retired. So um, let's talk about and finish up on the quiet professional out there.
One of the things when I talk about, I teach resiliency, I call it the bulletproof mind. And the first step in resiliency is motivation, to know that your sacrifice is for a noble purpose. Then motivation turned into action, come further up the scale from the sheep to the sheepdog. And then a positive self-fulfilling prophecy, no pity party, no macho man, and then and the next step is having your body ready and not being sleep deprived, and sleep hygiene stuff that are so important. But the next step is to nurture an environment of quiet professionals. And when you think about it, we talk about the laconic Spartan, the stoic Roman, the
Mm.
inscrutable samurai, the stiff upper lip Brit, and today we talk about the quiet professional. And those are all different ways of saying the same thing: self-control. And I tell everybody that leadership is never about screaming at people. Leadership is about staying calm. Nobody respects your temper tantrum. They respect your calm. And we're all human. You talked about being a parent. As we get older, we get better. That's why most of us make better grandparents who did parents. You, you ever
Trying to
looked
do
at
it
your
the second time around.
Yeah, it is. And you're 20 years older and you're more mature. It's called maturity. We want to get it as fast as we can. So one of the manifestations that comes out of this is this incredible dynamic of self-control. And the thing that's respected across warrior societies throughout history is self-control. Nobody respects our temper tantrum. They respect our calm. And leadership is never about screaming at people. It's about remaining calm. And there's this negative lesson, I tell in all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, the drill sergeant gets your face and shouts at you. It's a form of
Hmm.
stress inoculation, intentionally used in that one circumstance. You think the drill sergeant gets a normal unit, they're out of control. They're the last one to do that because they know it's a game that we played in one circumstance, completely inappropriate anywhere else.
Mm.
So, we've got this model of the drill sergeant screaming at us, and we think that's what leadership is supposed to be, when in reality, it's just the opposite. And the military and the law enforcement is about maintaining control and self-control. And again, if you lose your temper, you didn't lose it, you gave it away. It's the one thing in the world you can't control. And when we talk about the things you can control, it starts tonight with a good night's sleep and in a totally dark room, or putting on the gamer glasses, but in the hours before we're ready to go to bed. Those are all things that we can control. And the only
Exactly.
thing in the universe we can control is ourselves. And that brings us back to that internal locus of control, to that, the silent professional. It becomes our goal. We're all human. But as we get older, we get better and better. That's why we make better grandparents than we did parents. And we should constantly be striving. And one of the great satisfactions in life, here I am, 66 years old, and I can look back over the last 10 years and say, I'm a better person. And I'm a little bit better understanding, a little bit better control, and that's one of the great satisfactions in life, is to say, you have the body, the body grows a little weaker, and the body has a little harder time, but your EQ, your emotional quotient,
Mm.
your wisdom can continue to grow. And that becomes my wish for all your listeners, and my wish for you, that as we continue to strive, we become better people, and we can lead our families and lead our outfits and lead our civilization to a better place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for finishing that on such a great note. And, you know, your books are been phenomenal, and it's funny you're saying you're 66 years old. You're looking back, you've improved. Again, a great guest on the show talked about chapters of your life. You know, are you in the middle of it now? You're right now. You might be in the middle of the book that you're writing about yourself, but you've literally written books and written chapters. And I've watched your evolution. It's an absolute honor to have spoken with you and met you, and to present your story to all the listeners. And Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, I thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Been a pleasure, brother. Iron sharpens iron. As the Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so does one person uplift another. And it's always a two-way street. To you and all your listeners, God bless and thank you.
Thank you so much.